and the NMU School of Architecture is one of our benefactors. The trust was started by Herbie McWilliams and Albert Mild, actually by Albert Mild more than Herbie, some years ago. And I got to Rushmans in 1991, and it's really been going for some time. And we give out money, 50% to old age care and 50% to education. So that is our goal. And the trust has been going for some time, as I said, and we hope to continue going for many years to come. As long as the money lasts, we'll be able to assist you guys and support this event, for the event. I'm going to tell you a bit about Herbie McWilliams, who is actually the brains behind a lot of the buildings and the talent behind a lot of the architecture in Port Elizabeth, the heritage. He was born in 1907, and his father had architectural practice. When he was 5 years old, he made a journey to England with his family aboard the RMS Grand Tudor Castle. Went down to the engine room and made his first drawing of a ship at the age of 5. So, educated at St Andrews College, didn't impress the headmaster. He told his father in 1923 that even if his son grew a long white beard, he'd never be able to pass matric. So he wasn't very popular as a student. Slide here. He left school at 16, was sent as an article clerk to the office of Sir Herbert Baker and Partners in Cape Town to be trained as an architect. He went to London in 1926 when he was 19, and he studied at the Architectural Association in Bedford Square, obtained his diploma in 1929. He travelled vastly in Europe, Italy, Germany, Holland, Spain, and exhibited at the Royal Academy before coming back to South Africa in 1931 to enter his father's practice of Jones and McWilliams Architects. That's him as a youngster. Still as a youngster. This is a picture of Albert Mild and Herbie McWilliams. They were lifelong partners. They lived in the Poop at Amsterdam Hook. In 1932, he joined an archaeological expedition to Saqqara in Egypt, which was organized by the Oriental Institute of Chicago University. And he worked for 6 months at the university in Egypt, making sketches and measured drawings. In 1932, he visited Russia to take part in architectural reconstruction. Commenting on the trip, he left to the SA Institute record. He took a sketching tour in Holland, France, Italy in 1934. He joined the Cold Welcome expedition to Palestine, working on the reconstruction of the biblical city of Lachish near Hebron. Went back to England, journeying via Anatolia and the Balkans, an account of which forms the basis of his publication, The Diabolical. In 1935, he returned to PE to begin his practice. Several of the buildings with which he was first involved in PE, working with Jones McWilliams, were of distinctly North African or Middle Eastern nature. The Patrick Catholic Church in Port Elizabeth. Many of the subsequent buildings are characterful and defy categorization. That's the church in Central, St. Patrick's Church. You can see the North African influence. I'm not an architect, but I can see that as well. During the Second World War, he joined the Navy from 1940 to 1941. In 1941, he served with the coastal forces in the North Sea, transferred to the SANF, with which he took part in the invasion of North Africa, Sicily, South France, etc. His ship, HMS Heckler, was torpedoed 5 times in one night and was rescued by HMS Venomous from the North African coast on Armistice Day 1942. His vivid description of that night, written within days of his rescue, and the extraordinary ink-wash drawings of Heckler's sinking, are now in the Imperial War Museum in London, will keep the memory of his loss alive for generations to come. So those are the ink drawings he did while the ship was sinking. Quite incredible detail. Chips. He came back to Port Elizabeth after the war and after the death of Jones in 1946 and his father in 1950, who took charge of the practice in Port Elizabeth. Apart from his architecture, in which area at least late in his career, he allowed his staff a good deal of initiative. His skill in drawing led him to be a sought-after illustrator of books and articles, among these being 18th century architecture in South Africa by G.E. Pierce, in which some of these sketches appear. He was also well known as a yachtsman. Collaboration with a fellow architect, H.W.E. Stouch, who designed the Sprog sailing dinghy and represented South Africa in various sailing events. That H.W.E. Stouch was the founder of Stouch Foster Architects, SVA, EU-based and now Joburg all over the country. Member of Swartkop Yacht Club, Commodore 3738, Project Interclub contest in Sharpie and dinghy classes, winning International Sharpie Trophy in 38 and 46, Interclub Sprog in 47-54. He also represented South Africa in the Olympics in 1948 in the Firefly single-hand class. His life partner was Albert Mild. They were well known in PE and beyond. Albert was a private individual, reputed of aristocratic Hungarian birth, orphaned at an early age. His inheritance was overseen by Swiss trustees. He had been educated in Germany prior to World War II. Fire destroyed the house at Anton near PE in 1986, and tragically most of his papers and drawings were burnt. The two had been life partners on 50 years, and Albert set up a trust as a charitable foundation in 1990. During the later stages of Weber's life, he developed Alzheimer's disease, and Albert at first nursed him in the apartment of Park Drive. Then in 1991, admitted him to the Munro Kirk home. Weber passed away in 1995, and Albert in 2002. Their legacy is the Milde McWilliams Trust, of which the School of Architecture in MU is one of the beneficiaries, and the Milde McWilliams Memorial Lecture is the legacy of that trust. So photographs will follow now of Weber and Albert. Some of the buildings which he did, one of them Reserve Bank building, also North African architecture is quite clear in this one. And quite coincidentally, Rashman occupied this very building for about 15 years, soon after I joined him. St. Peter's Greek Orthodox Church. You'll recognize Villas Marina, you drive past on the way to lectures. The P. St. George's Club, Quebeca, recognize that as well. And probably one of the most famous buildings in Port Elizabeth is the Edward Hotel in Quebeca. And then, few people know that they also designed the Grey Schools in Mill Park. And they are amazing architecture. This is their house, the Poop, in Amsterdam, which burned down. Some sketches, obviously from his time at sea, from the war. Again. And then just to conclude, one of the funniest stories we had with Albert Mild wasn't actually Herbie, but Albert's, he had a Rolls Royce, and when the Queen came to visit, she was driven around PE in his Rolls Royce. And he then decided to have his Rolls Royce serviced. At that stage, foreign exchange was quite tight in the country, you couldn't get money out of the country. So the story was that his car was confiscated there at customs in London. He took his Rolls over for a service by ship, and he had a whole lot of gold coins in the boot and in the basement of the car. And customs actually found this, and they actually confiscated the car. And one of our partners had to fly to London to try and get the car back, which they eventually did after paying quite a hefty fine on Albert's behalf. So he was a quite entrepreneurial businessman, and also knew how to cook the system if it worked. Right. Guys, that's all from us. Thank you very much.
All right. That does not mean that for you to become legendary and to bequeath a trust from your legacy, that you must also export gold coins. All right. So this is part B. The Milde McWilliams Trust address is always served in two parts. So the first movement was just delivered, and certainly you are continuously inspired of how an architect can certainly do freehand graphics in that way as well, without digital tools that you possibly have at your disposal. I'm now going to ask the Acting Executive Dean to come forward and to then share what the criteria of the bursary that's made available by the Trust, what the criteria for awarding this particular bursary, and for also then to announce the recipient of the 2025 edition of that.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's now my pleasure to announce the recipient of the Milde McWilliams bursary. In terms of the bursary requirements, this honour is awarded to a student who has excelled academically across all 3 years of the bachelor's degree. This year, the recipient was the top student across all 3 years of the Bachelor of Architectural Studies. And this is, of course, Jennifer Cross. Please join us, Jennifer.
All right, so congratulations to Jennifer. For those of you who have not been to your own graduation yet, that's what the Dean read out sounded very graduation-y. So it will all equally be a very proud moment, as that certainly is for Jennifer, and for all of you in your congratulations to her. All right, we are now here for the main event. The purpose of this evening is for us then to hear from creators, practitioners, and people doing exciting work out in the real world of work. So with that, I'm now going to ask the Director of the School of Architecture, Andrew Palferman, to introduce the laureates and speakers for 2025. I think your Director of School deserves a round of applause. To be right.
Thanks, Ryan, and thanks, Delenka, and everyone for being here. It's a great pleasure tonight for me to introduce Nindya and Nikhil, who are back. They met as students in architecture back in the early 2000s. They've formed an enduring partnership since then. Nindya originally from Mauritius, and Nikhil's a homie from Gqeberha. As I said, Nelson Mandela Metropolitan University in those days, both award-winning students. Nindya was a top design student, third year, and finished with a BAS. And Nikhil, in his final year, was the regional Corobrik recipient and the winner of the Masonry Award at the National Corobrik Awards for that year. So that's their start into the competition in the award space. There have been numerous competitions and they have been widely publicised, and hence are back here on those grounds. I'll just mention a few of those. Competitions done together in 2017, the DBR Kinkada competition for a school in Lama, Kenya, was won. In 2019, members of the Red Bull design team for the year. Nindya won the Best Ceramic Piece at the KwaZulu-Natal Ceramic Association Awards in 2019. And their partnership was cemented, excuse the pun, in the formation of Studio Corky as business partners in 2021. A studio centered on making generally. Since then, some continuation in architecture. The House and Garden Residence of the Year was won in conjunction with Julia Rutherford Architects in 2024, and they are in the Escape 100 list for this year, and were shortlisted for the Cape Town Furniture Week Design of the Year awards. So, yeah, fantastic to have successful students back. Little anecdote, I thought it was a long chat here. Brian Wintermeyer is in the audience. Anyway, Brian Wintermeyer's got the workplace here. It was the first place, as I understand that formally, that Nikhil worked at. He then left to the workshop in Durban. But Brian tells the story that in his last day, and as Nikhil was leaving the office, he said, "Cheers, guys, I'll see you again when I'm famous." And I guess that chat was what that was about. But yeah, it takes courage. Design takes courage. We know that, and a good dollop of confidence goes a long way to success in the game. Congratulations to both of you for how far you've come, and we look forward to hearing your lessons to us on the journey. So, thank you, and we look forward.
You are extremely obedient, because I think you are waiting for me to say. You are, okay, all right. Everybody, on 3, going to count 1, 2, 3, and then you give a resounding, welcoming round of applause to the 2 speakers this evening. But only when I count 3. Are you ready? Okay, 1, I saw 2, 3. Let's welcome them.
Thanks for that intro, Andrew. Yeah, another lesson is just pretend you know what you're doing. Okay, welcome everybody, and yeah, thank you so much for showing up, and thank you to the Nelson Mandela University Department of Architecture for having us. Thank you to the Milde McWilliams Trust for contributing so much to the profession, to the design industry, and to the School of Architecture. It's amazing to be here. It's amazing to be back here. It's a trip to be back here. I mean, wow. We've sat in that audience a number of times, and to be on the other side of it now feels, I won't lie, a little bit of imposter syndrome, but you know, all we can do is be honest and share our experience since we founded Studio Corky. So yeah, this is my partner in life and business, Nindya, and I'm Nikhil, and we're really stoked to be here, so I'm going to get into it. Modern Lush. So it started as an idea, as a discussion between Nindya and myself around how we actually envision the act of making and how we practice the act of making, because we've always worked from an instinctive point of view, drawing on our education and our lived experiences in order to make, in order to design. But as you go along, you have to be, there comes a time when you actually have to distill those principles that inform what you do into something tangible. And Modern Lush is the name of our movement, like Bauhaus, if it ever gets there. But I'm going to get into a little bit of what it is and how we approach design, and then just shoot through some of what we do. We call ourselves a multidisciplinary design house because design, I know in sort of contemporary industrialized society, it's great and it makes sense to subdivide things into further and further, smaller and smaller categories. Architecture, and then it becomes industrial architecture and residential architecture. But no, design is design, and design is life. How do we live? We shape the patterns that we practice. And Modern Lush, I think, is exactly that. It's a contrast and a bringing together of the industrialized, I don't even say aesthetic, but like the nakedness of making with the honesty and the process and the basically mistakes that come with making by hand. So when you bring together a living surface, something inspired by life, and you bring together something that is purely driven by function, you create a hyper-awareness of both. You create a longevity that you wouldn't normally have from a purely industrial or a purely crafted piece of design. So I'm going to do what I don't normally like doing. I'm just going to read off here because I think we got it right in this little blurb. But Modern Lush is like, it's expressed as fabrication and use as a seamless relationship between a functional imperative, which is the visible structure, and a living surface, so unique, handcrafted, and rooted in place and tactile experiences. And I'm going to get tactile experience is a very important part of this sort of description, and I'm going to get into that just now. And in manifestation, it's defined as complexity mirroring the human condition, because none of us are simple, none of us are caricatures. We're all filled with complex emotions and contradictory emotions. And it's through the distillation of the design components into function, so expressed as an honest materiality. Steel is steel, stone is stone, you know. But it's stone taken to the nth degree. What can stone do? As with every other material that we try and use. And then process, the reverential act of making by hand. When you craft something, when you cook, when you paint, when you draw, when you play music, when you sing, there's a reverence to the act and the process. It's never just a mechanical act, you know. There's life in it. And when you bring that together with something that is purely functional, you really do create magic. You really do create longevity. But before we get into that, I want to show you quickly something that was basically the first project that Nindya and I did together, which is the Kinkada Design Build Research School in Lamu. So Lamu is a coastal town in Kenya, really beautiful, and this project was run by the Design Build Research Institute out of Canada. We're not sure about the implementation of it yet because it's one of those things where they've got to find the money and you know how those things go. But what we tried to do was, this was quite strongly informed by the thesis project that I did at Nelson Mandela University that I'm going to go through quite quickly just now, as well as local coastal East African architecture, which is strongly in itself influenced by Middle Eastern architecture, which was, there was a colonial empire of Oman that ran down the east coast of the whole of Africa all the way to Zanzibar at one stage. And they influenced a lot of the buildings in that part of the world. If you go to Zanzibar, you'll see. So, quite simply, this was conceived of as a three-dimensional landscape within an enclosed, call it fortress of learning, where it turned its back to the hard exterior, drew on local architecture of closely positioned buildings to one another to create mutual shade, but also created like a three-dimensional planted landscape where you don't have institutional buildings. You've got a landscape made out of stone and bricks for people or children to explore and mission around, and the classrooms then become like these flexible spaces that open up and can all be used as one space that people can move through, or can be closed up to be functional classrooms in the contemporary sense. This took the first place in Africa for the competition, which we were very shocked about. I woke Nindya up at like 4 o'clock in the morning to say, babe, we won. And she's like, what the hell are you talking about? Because, you know, they sent the email from Canada, we got it at some random time. And then I was like, nah, babe, we won King Carter. And she's like, what? So yeah, here we are. But I'm going to get into, thank you. Yeah, we'd like to see it built. So let's will that into existence. Then to get into the actual start of our talk, our background at Nelson Mandela University. I have to start by commending the university for the type of education that we receive. It was an education rooted in making. As you would know by now, we revere the act of making, not for the final product, but for the act in itself. It's a conversation between you and the material, you and the matter. And that was imbued in us from a very early stage by not just the lecturers, but our fellow students, our colleagues. The importance of not concentrating on object, on not concentrating on image. We live in such a digitized world and I mean, we're guilty of it right now. Everything is about image, everything is about Instagram, everything is about TikTok. It's about what you absorb through the visual medium of a screen, as opposed to how you engage physically. When you share physical space with something, with somebody, there's nothing like that. There's nothing like the tactile sense of a material, you know, how it smells, how a building smells when you walk in, how it sounds when you knock on a piece of stone versus when you knock on a piece of steel. All of that is design, and all of that was strongly sort of emphasized to us at Nelson Mandela University. The importance of building models to see how things, forms, elements come together, how light interacts with them as you turn it, is such an important thing that it's the reason we both actually chose to do hand drawings. This was a crematorium project from 4th year, which was strongly influenced by Onion Row, those of you who know it. But the act of drawing allows you to investigate the light and redrawing and redrawing and redrawing, and how the forms and details and structural elements interact with one another to create space. And then building a model allows you to physically see it and resolve things that you wouldn't normally have resolved. And it's so beautiful to walk into the studio and just still see models, still see full scale, like these beautifully made models that are structurally resolved. I guarantee you, we've spoken and we've visited a number of tertiary educational institutions, and the amount of people whose presentations just look like Pinterest boards, it's actually disheartening. To sort of walk into our faculty is incredible. So well done to the students. You guys should give yourselves a round of applause. I'm going to talk very quickly about my thesis project at Nelson Mandela University. This was the design of a mother and child center in KwaZulu. As we all know, in South Africa, we have, in what were previously deemed or demarcated as townships, a very ephemeral architecture, an architecture of non-permanence, an architecture of infrastructure and observation, where your vertical elements, your elements of hierarchy in the landscape were elements of observation. There were cameras and lookout posts and lights, and the materials that were used then to build with were cement block and steel and found objects. So it was very deliberately designed so that there was no sense of identity, no sense of permanence. People, being people, reclaim that space through the implementation and the introduction of their own personalized elements, but at the same time, the very DNA of it was infrastructural. The very DNA of it was divisional. So what this building tried to do was to bring in an architecture of permanence through, firstly, spatial hierarchy by creating a very defined public space. Just go back up quickly. Like over here, you've got a public square that leads into a library, that leads into the actual mother and child center, which is an antenatal center. Antenatal being prenatal, not antenatal. And then also creating a very strong sense of circulation hierarchy. So corridors of commerce, corridors of residential, sort of taller buildings that are densely packed, but also built out of materials that speak of permanence. And then introducing elements of hierarchy that can belong to the space, that people can claim and people can own, through using these basically the anti-apartheid architecture. It's not an architecture of infrastructure, it's an architecture of permanence, an architecture of presence. Yeah, and that was well received by the corporate panel, well received by the powers that be, and yeah, I enjoyed it. So this was just some. This section in reality, I think some of you may have seen it, is about 3 meters long, hand drawn, which I don't know where it's disappeared to now, but I should find it. And also again uses very, I want to say ancient, but archetypal elements within a contemporary mode of building, and a mode of building that will allow you to expand and extend the space. Through also this thesis investigated the relationship that we have with our past through the use of archetypes. What creates common memories between all of us, regardless of culture, regardless of background, regardless of language? There are archetypal references in the Jungian sense that we have, and this one took on, or this project built on our relationship with the natural world. Now, anyway, to create a division between the urban realm and the natural realm is again another one of those things where we divide. It is all one habitat, but at the same time, that habitat can have or cannot have access to nature, access to natural light, access to planting, the smells the smells that a breeze brings through a window. You know, when you're sleeping on a spring morning, that's all part of design. And then there was research that I cited in the thesis that spoke about that connection increasing the capacity to heal and creating a greater qualitative experience. But I was more interested in why. It's not good enough to just say, oh, of course it feels nice to have a nice breeze, you know? Why? And that's where Jung's teachings and writings come in. But anyway, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about this. That's a close-up of the drawing, which I really like. And that's just speaking about how the space feels. I built the model onto the section because I wanted it to be, I just felt that you didn't get that sense of depth. You didn't get that sense of spatial quality just from the drawing. The act of making again comes into it, and you know, you create something like this and it really engages me. So yeah, just to sort of summarize it, the natural evolution of the township tectonic, creating a positive architecture out of a vernacular with a historically negative connotation. I say historically negative, it still is, because the legacy of apartheid and the division of spaces and the division of peoples still endures in South Africa, because architecture and urbanism has that power, and they were unfortunately terribly successful at dividing us. And our role now is to undo that. You know, it's easier to destroy than it is to build, and we have to build the future. So yeah, you guys have a bit of responsibility. I want to get to the visual art, because both Nindya and myself are practicing visual artists it goes back to the act of making and the reverential act of making. To see, yeah, that's better. To see your world, to absorb your world, it's not enough to just see it. It's not enough to just scroll. It's not enough to just like or comment. You've got to engage in a real way. And how do you absorb that? You can absorb it through photography. Not photography that you have to share on Instagram. Photography for yourself. Understand how light works. Understand how light bounces off concrete versus how it bounces off of steel. Understand how people engage with the space. As you're drawing a street, how do they move through it? How do they engage with the surfaces, the doors, each other? And you only really slow down and absorb in that way when you actually make, when you draw, when you sculpt, when you shoot. And that's why both Nindya and myself, through very different mediums, explore the world of visual art. My first body of work was called Urban Conversations, and it was just a simple ink and stick representation of places that I've been to. The presentation of Herbert McWilliams' drawings was unbelievable. I mean, those drawings are mind-blowing. And it speaks again to the importance, just as an aside, both Nindya and I were saying, how interesting were these guys' lives? Like, what the hell? We're so boring. These folks were like fighting in wars and then drawing sinking ships. But anyway, yeah, we've got things to live up to. So yeah, the act of drawing, the act of like absorbing and almost interpreting space and form through your lived experiences onto a page, onto a canvas, into a piece of music is so important in the act of design and in the act of making, because it ensures that you really, truly see. This came from a body of work that was commissioned by the National Gallery for one of their... It was one of their programs where they basically invited artists to submit a proposal and they would then choose to fund it or not. My idea was to document post-group areas act spaces, which there's a lot spoken about, and rightfully so, pre-group areas act spaces. District 6, Sophia Town, South End, Hiabas. But what happened post-group areas act spaces? What happened when people were actually forced by the powers to move into a new space? What did they bring with them to create community? How did they create lives? Because I grew up in Mākā, which is an Indian township, post-Group Areas Act. I had a great life. But that was made by my family. So I'm interested in what those elements were that basically made our families make homes. You know, in these dire circumstances, these terrible, criminal circumstances. And this was a body of work that investigated that. I don't want to go into too much of the details. I mean, we can talk about it, but this is an image of my grandfather outside of the street that he used to live in, or live on, before he was forced to move to Mākā, where he had a thriving business over here, which obviously didn't work anymore when he was forcefully evicted. This is on the left is my great-grandfather back in India, and on the right is just a cool picture that I took in Zanzibar. The left is my yard with of my grandfather's house in Mākā, where they hang washing, and on the right is the Juma Masjid on Grey Street in Durban, which was pivotal to the Muslim and non-Muslim community of the Durban CBD, which is still a very thriving, very, very vibey place to be. It then evolved to these gestural mark-making types of abstract botanicals. They deliberately blur the lines between infrastructural elements and botanical elements, because too often we divide what is natural and what is man-made into urban and natural, and we introduce, oh, let's put a plant here. let's put planting here, let's do this. No, everything is the same. It is all the habitat that it's all the space that we inhabit. So the gestural works try to, through fields of color and through just movements of the brush, blur the lines between what is a power line and what is a vine. So that's kind of where these pieces come from. On the left is one of 9 paintings I did for a hotel group as part of a commission earlier this year. And on the right is 2 of my paintings on show at Chefs and Gardens for Latitudes Art Fair. These are just some examples of the work. And then some murals. This is my friend's club in Durban, where they've attached an art gallery to it, and this was the second iteration of Modern Lush, which we expressed as an exhibition. And then I'm going to hand over to Nindya to talk more about her beautiful work.
Hello, everybody. Thanks, Nikhil. That was. So I am going to. I don't actually know where to start. I'm going to start by saying why art making is so important to us. When we were practicing as architects, and you're sitting for 8 hours, sometimes more, in front of a computer, and you're moving doors and counting toilet accessories, and you start from the bottom. And I was very lucky I worked at a very nice firm. I got to manage project even though I didn't have masters, but it was really I had a very good working experience. But there was something that, if you look at Nikhil's drawing from university, there's a creative magic that sits in him, and it sits in everybody. If you are studying architecture, you are here because you have a creative center that needs to be expressed. It's a very tough thing because it's a vulnerable piece of you, and you put that out of there. It's very hard. Like, your first script feels absolutely terrible, but that muscle needs to be exercised. You can't let it die. So if you ever go and practice architecture in a firm, please don't forget to draw. Don't forget to make, because otherwise you just, that creative soul is just it doesn't grow, So I started by telling Nikhil, get up, we need to draw. Let's draw, and we entered some competitions, and it just grew from there. I've always been attracted to the medium clay, and I found a teacher, and I took some classes, and I just started drawing it. But because of the education we received here at NMU, there was never the idea of fitting in one stereotype. You could be whatever, material could be anything. So I didn't take clay and I made some tableware, but I took clay and say, how do I express a piece of myself, that creative, or the memory of me, or my experiences of life? How do I use that medium to put it out there for people to experience? And when I say people, I especially mean children, because I feel like when children respond to your artwork, you've done something right, because they're experienced in a very emotive way. So the work that you're seeing here is called Refragmented. It's a fragmentation, I call it a fragmentation of my memory of the Indian Ocean. I grew up in Mauritius, and I am an open water swimmer. And I spent a lot of time in the reef, and I saw it dying slowly with global warming. I mean, everybody talks about global warming, but when you are in a small island, you experience it firsthand. It literally just slips out of your finger. Next thing, there's no reef there. And it's actually very heartbreaking, but I've put it out there for people to experience in a very magical way. A lot of these installations are actually being shown in galleries like Everard Reed, and they're actually generally about 2 meters by 3 meters high. And sometimes you can walk through it, sometimes you can't. I particularly enjoy to see how people interact with my work, especially the sculptural work, because that's like information for me. I just like note it down and make a mental map of like that kind of experience. The picture on the left is actually a house in Camps Bay, and the client wanted a 12-meter drop of that installation. It's very difficult to capture because it's an atrium, but it's incredibly beautiful because it flanks the Indian Ocean on one side and the mountain on one side, and the light just comes through it. And on an average, that kind of installation is about 10,000 beads. Each bead is actually handmade out of different types of clay that I work with. This was another installation for the Beach Hotel that was in Johannesburg. And the client wanted a screen, but they wanted like something that moves, something that has depth, something that kind of evolves as the light changes throughout the day. And we made these pieces of clay shards, and we called it the drift. It feels like things that drift over the ocean and you just pick it up. The client absolutely loved that work. And this is actually a playful part of my practice. I absolutely love mountains. I don't know why. I like rocks. When I was little, I used to pick rocks and put in my pocket. My mom was so embarrassed. But I absolutely love rocks, and I love the texture on it. And every time I visit places, and I'm always like taking a picture and observing things. But it's more, this form, this manifestation that you see is more of like the nature of memory, like spatial memory. What are the things that, if you leave this room and tonight you think of this room, what is the thing that stuck to you? And I think I try and distill that into elements that are like very simple, like a circle or little carvings. I think the little carvings could represent insects walking, could be a human carving, could be counting, I don't know, math. Like there's so many. It's an iconography that could have many meaning. And somebody I had never heard about it. I'm quite surprised I didn't hear about it, because this man came to me and says, "This looks like the Cappadocia, and now I'm obsessed with this place. I want to go there. I want to do a residency. I finally found a residency there. Maybe when I get leave from the business, I'll go to a residency there." And this form of I call these actually earth forms, and this earth form was highly influenced by my time in residency in Cape Town, the jaggedness of it and the kind of erosion that happened in there. And every time, especially when you look at something like this, there's like a loss of scale. So I always imagine things in a very playful way. What if we make things bigger, and what if we make things smaller? So my smallest earth form is like maybe 2 centimeters, and my biggest one is like on my hips. And recently, last year, I was on a residency and in Victorfontein in the Free State, and it's actually quite an incredible place because it's owned by an architect, but he used the earth, the rocks, and the things of the landscape to build the lodges and the artist studio. So he used different techniques like rammed earth, sandbags, putting, I don't know how to say, like cobble rock. How would you call the rocks that they put in the mud in between? I'm not too sure. But he used so many different techniques to actually build this, and he experimented, and I could learn from the team on site. I went there as an artist, but I can't help it. My architecture was always copying. So, sorry about that. And I had the opportunity. I always said I want to make a huge, like mud, like earth form. I want to make a big one. And I got the opportunity to work with the team, and we actually built this, like massive, like how would you call it, a hide in the landscape. And it was inspired, like, I was there for 8 weeks, and I needed 4 weeks to assimilate the landscape, because you get there, I live in the city, and you get there and there's like no shops, nothing, you're like in the middle of this most beautiful landscape. It's actually a meteorite, the biggest meteorite impact site in the world. It was only discovered 30 years ago. And I started like observing these nests, these weaver's nest, and the sense of community and also the structure of these nests. I was absolutely obsessed with them, and they're quite expressive. They have like spirally grass, and in a tree there's maybe 15 nests, but only one is occupied with the babies, the rest are all decoys. So with the team, I put forward a proposal to the owner of the landscape, and I said, look, I want to make this. And I had 2 weeks to actually build this sculpture. We packed earth in bags, we compacted by hand. I got so strong. From no gym work is actually better than farm work. And then we created this hide with 2 entrances, just like the weaver's nest. It's like a test of intention. There's like a decoy entrance, and actually the animals of the landscape, they will find like little bokkies and all of that would occupy that space. And it has since, it's about, I would say, 1.5 year old, the landscape has reclaimed it, it's not there anymore. And I think that was the intention, the impermanence of land art and art itself. And while I was there, I sat a lot and watched the sunrise and the sunset, but I also watched how the light and how the animals, the bird, and things moved, and there was time to reflect, time to just sit a whole morning and reflect on things. And the wall is painted with this type of paint that's called Swedish paint. It most probably less than 100 rand to make the 5 liter, and it just has flour, linseed oil, and the coloring comes from the earth itself. So, and it's super textured, and then there's this dapple light that keeps on hitting the wall, but it keeps moving because the sun moves and the leaves move and the birds move the leaves. And one of the medium that I work with, my drawings and paintings, is ink and bleach. So it's almost like a subtractive, additive kind of work. So you have a black, I prime the page with ink, and then I start removing and add again. And actually tracing the light that moved throughout the day, or at a specific time, I'll wait for it. Tracing was such an incredible process of like truly connecting. It's like quite metaphorical with the medium that I was working with and how the light moved. This is another body of work that I'm very, very passionate about that keeps evolving. This one actually, I called it light form, and this one is called sea form. This is talks very strongly to my relationship with water. I spend a lot of time in the ocean, and I love that when I'm swimming, it's this meditative process of the bubbles and the reef, and you know, the surface of the ocean, the sun rising and hitting the surface of the ocean. And those are all things that keep me, like when I have this, every morning I wake up and I go swim, whatever happens in the day becomes easier, because that's like my sanctuary, it's my meditation. So in my work, I often document in a very abstracted manner how water moves, how water feels to me. And coming to a very important part of our life, in 2019 I quit my job, and because I was ready to get to the next stage of our journey. And I did some projects with Red Bull, and we had a bit of savings, and towards the end of the year an opportunity came where a person that I used to work with when I was practicing as an architect contacted me, said, I want to sell my equipment, would you like to buy it? And it's a glazing facility. a tile glazing facility. And I phoned Nikhil, I'm like, this sounds crazy. He's like, we're going to get it and it's going to be amazing. So we acquired the equipment and we actually set up with a lot of repairs. But when I practiced as an architect, I practiced in industrial architecture. I worked on large-scale workshops and factories and labs. So setting up a factory became second nature for me, like understanding process and actually getting the space and knowing what are the requirements for the factory was so easy. And my experience in clay, I was already working with the medium as an artist. And we went in fearlessly. And COVID hit, the equipment was in storage until mid-2020 when the restriction was sort of getting lax. Then I was like, we're going to set it up now. And we set up the factory, and the first actual project, I'm going to come back to this because this is a very special thing. I'm not sure where that is, but anyway, we'll get there. But I'm just going to talk you through this project. But we set up the factory, and it has been an incredible project for us because the demand for ceramics currently is very high, but like handmade ceramics, but to make ceramics is incredibly expensive, and not many people have the, the courage to actually set up a ceramic factory. Your overheads are very high. And this project here that you see is a very special project. It's our latest screen that we just released. But it's a very simple thing. It's a sheet, and it has a hollow tube, and it can be in different modules and different glazes and different textures. And I actually want to see this on a facade. That's the next stage. I want to see it on a building facade and imagine this thing that moves and flaps and with the wind. They're quite heavy, so they're not going to dangle, but I really want to see that. I might use it in one of our projects even. And it has very beautiful details, very simple in terms of concept, but very, like it's like a tapestry. So going back to Kalki Ceramics, as we launched Kalki Ceramics, we immediately started working with leading designers in the country because of the work itself spoke for itself. I didn't have to sell the work. And we worked with Tristan Duplessis, we worked with HK, we worked with like a lot of leading designers. And our work was immediately placed in prestigious projects and all of a sudden picked up traction. The one on the right here is Mama Samba, it's in Johannesburg. That's also Mama Samba, that's always welcome on the one side. But we don't call it tiles, we call it ceramic surface because the limit is not a tile, it's a surface, it's a living surface. So we work with different profiles, we play with the surface, and how does the light move? How do we contrast a material with raw terracotta and then a glazed surface? And we also like go back to what Nikhil was talking about. We really tap into our lived experiences, like when we walk on the beach and we pick up a piece of coral and immediately we're like, oh, if we use this with this glaze, and all of a sudden we start creating a palette. So naturally people resonate very strongly with the palette that we work with because it's so familiar. It's very familiar. So there's very soft tones and very like corals and greens and off-whites. On the right here, there's a marble type of clay. It's an experiment. We're waiting for the client. I hope it comes. It's a great project. And the concave, you can see how on this concave tiles, like the glaze is living, it's reflecting, although it's one material, but it's the crackling here. There's like when the clay is fired and then it sort of sits and it does these little crackling noises. It's actually quite amazing. Some client phoned me freak out, like, take your thing back and bring it back. And that's us in the studio, and we want to emphasize this thing of like making. Like, sure, we can make a tile, but then how do we customize it? How do we put ourselves in it? And I think this picture here is very much that. It's us carving, us adding a little bit of our life on it, which makes it very special. And this is actually in a farm that it's a sister farm that we collaborate with, and with a master ceramics artist, and his name is Lindsay Scott. And he extracts the clay from the midlands and process it and make the profiles that we design. And we work together. Sometimes our staff go and work on his farm. Sometimes I'm there developing research and developing specific profiles with him. But it's an incredible process. And that color, when fired, becomes this red. And this is the glazing process. So there's different ways that we glaze. You spray, but this is a hand pouring technique. And when you fire that again, this is what you get. And it's this layered, and this has a copper oxide in it, and it's very much of a natural origin, and that's why it's got this richness, the texture that you see, the speckles and all of that. And I think, you know, no tile importer that's bringing things from China can bring things like this, and that's what makes us so unique in our field. This was our first project. Nikhil was still working at the office, but this is his project actually. He was working for Lisa Rorik, and he was the lead architect for the Zululami estate, and this is the clubhouse. But I remember standing on top of that piece of tree there and presenting my tiny little sample. I had never made tiles. It's so small. I'd never made tiles ever. And I said, yeah, I can do it. Like, you know, like Nikhil said, pretend you can do it. And it was 210 square meter of tiles, 10,240 individual pieces. And in our factory, there's 8 different stations. So these tiles were handled 8 times. And I had only 2 staff, me and 2 staff. I remember doing my first delivery, I overloaded my 1-ton bucky, and I was driving like anxiety mode to deliver this. But once we put this, it legitimized the product immediately. It was real, it worked, it's really beautiful. And from there onward, Kalki Ceramics done incredible things. This is one of our latest incredible projects. It's the Aspen room for the Holland group and the Yellowwoods group. And you can see our handmade profile in there, and also our the incredible palette that we develop in-house. Every color is mixed in-house. We can match a swatch. And I think that's it's so much fun. So we do a lot of research and development in color. And the next one, I will pass to Nikhil.
So, like Nindya was saying, we came across our businesses in a very strange way. Kalki Ceramics was bought from someone who was retiring, or the equipment was bought from someone who was retiring. And similarly with Studio Kalki, I was doing a lot of work with this artisanal steel workshop, and the owner of the workshop was this grumpy old man who was 900 years old, and he was over it, and he was going to move to California to work and live on a wine farm. And he didn't want his guys to be without a job. So he asked if, since we had a business, we had established Kalki Ceramics, it was 2 years old at the time, I was engaging with them to build some of our equipment, our kilns. He was like, well, don't you want to take over? And I was like, fuck yeah, of course. And we'd worked out a deal, we took over the operation, and I still remember Mike, the main boilermaker and factory manager now of Studio Kalki, nearly had a panic attack when when Ken, the old owner, told him I was going to take over. It was like, who's this Lighty? Like, and he started like contacting his cousin in Australia to get a job there and stuff. And anyway, long story short, we managed to convince them to stay, and we took over the steel operation. And that opened up a whole new realm of possibilities, because now you've got the ability in-house to research and develop form and functional items in a material that is the complete antithesis to ceramics. So just to quickly take you through some of these, what you can see here on this cover image is a language that we established of elemental forms, circles, rectangles, and not shown here but triangles, just very platonic forms which then come together to create timeless pieces. We try not to be formalistically gymnastic. The beauty is in the making and the material. This was our first workshop. It was literally a hole in the wall. It was a basement in an industrial space. We still smaller than the stage, probably half the size of the stage. And those were the first 2 crocodile benches that we made. We still have that workshop, but we're renting it out to a bicycle repairman, which is the magical space now. This is where we are at the moment. Ubaba Mulefe is on the left. He's a master ceramicist, and he helps us with like very specialized pieces when necessary. And on the right is the other wing of the workshop where Mike, the factory manager, is doing his thing. But yeah, it's a significant enough upgrade. And then this is sort of some of the work in progress in the space, just to give you an idea of the scale. Yeah, Nindya says the people are the work in progress. This is the iconic famous. This was the winner of, so we won Nando's Hot Young Designer for the 2022 edition. Thank you. And the Fynbos was the winning piece. The actual Fynbos is half the size of this. It's called the Fynbos because the colors and the forms are inspired by local vegetation and Fynbos. We then extrapolated the design language into different avenues. So the mural language became the formal language, and then the mode of making became a sort of standard mode of making for all of our items, where it's slender steel, expressed where possible, joined or put together with very organic ceramics. These are our latest Kilkie sofas. These were launched at Cape Town Furniture Week and have been incredibly well received. There are some changes. These are the prototypes, but you can see the clear thread between this language and this language. We're just using different materials. This is designed as extra deep because you can sit on it with your dogs. We've got 2 different languages. So this, all the architects over here, this I'm very unhappy with. We're going to make it a freestanding bolster because then you get to see the steel form expressed, and then you also get to put that below for your back. So things change. That's like the importance of prototyping. Similarly with this one, very elegant. We're currently building the double and the triple seater version of this for our own house. And this is pretty interesting. This is different, a departure from what we normally do. This is the Wormsland server, which we did in collaboration with Outlander for the American Hardwood Export Council. Back when the US was still friendly with us, they were exporting a carbon negative timber to South Africa in the form of American red oak. So it was an incredibly sustainable material and beautiful because it's a hardwood with a vein through it so that you could actually impregnate it with different inks and stains and stuff. It's an incredible wood. And we created the Wormslam server inspired by just the coils of a snake. So the ceramic and the steel, the ceramic and the timber work together in alternating directions to create light, just to play with the light. It's a really special piece. It's monolithic, but when you approach it closer, it's soft and it's quite a sensitive piece. This one has also found a lot of, it's been quite loved and it's found a lot of success, which we're very happy with, because it's flippant complex to make. So yeah, that's a close-up of what the glaze actually does in conjunction with the timber, and I think it's really magic. This is Nindya's Bloom light. She can talk about it.
So a lot of when I approach like lighting design, I always think about a very playful way, because light is always moving. It's not a static thing. So a lot of my lighting design is actually more on the playful side, but sometimes very serious. You'll see why now. But the Blom is a very special piece. It's like a blommetjie, a flower doodle, and the light source is concealed. The picture on the left here is actually was shown at an exhibition that was curated by Tracy Lynch, and it's next to David Crennaugh. And the tapestry that you see on the chair is a project with the Kiskama embroidery team. And it's actually a very special piece, and I release limited Tracy's there in the window. But I do like maybe 2 editions of 12 a year. And the Blom actually is a newer version of the June. The June itself is basically 2 sheets and a light source. And you have different ways to experience this light. It casts a shadow around the sheet, and there's a warm glow around, and then there's the center, which is almost like the core of things. I call it the mother and the moon, the 2 sheets. And I do some carving on it, which kind of like brings back the identity that we see throughout my work, my artwork. It looks simple, but this light takes actually 50 different components to put together. Everything is done in-house, and it takes 12 different specialities to put it together. I used to outsource it until I got very impatient with people taking long, and I was like, I'm going to do it myself. So I braise, I do electrical work, I've learned a lot over the past 2 years with this project, very special. Whenever I think of a client comes to me, it's like designers comes, design a wall light. If you go on Pinterest, there's so much going on, like there's so much precedent. But then I'm always like, how do I take something very elemental? Okay, we're gonna have a wall light. It's a semicircle, but then how do I create a sense of curiosity? There's always a sense of curiosity in my work. How do I create that? And here's a simple cut, and the line shines through it. And then there's again the little bit of carving on top. And this was a project in Johannesburg. They use it all around the football. And this project is very special, but that's all.
So, those of you familiar with Cape Town, the Muizenberg beach huts were 100 and something years old. And they were pretty iconic on the landscape, especially when you take the train past St. James. It's like it's like a global landmark. And they were recently replaced. So the city of Cape Town, along with Always Welcome, put out basically a competition, a call for proposals, where we had to, or designers across the country, had to present what they would do with these pieces, with this old timber that was just sitting there with the original, like 3-4 layers of paint, hundreds of years old. And we decided, let's make a drinks cabinet, because a drinks cabinet in your home is like it's always an iconic piece. Like mates come over, and it's like it takes center stage. You open it up, you make a cocktail. It's like it's one of those pieces that doesn't want to be in the background, that calls for being sort of forefront. We then basically took our same principles of exposing the structure and then creating a beautiful and evocative pattern using the original colors, original paint, within a steel frame and then sealed with a resin so that the paint is kept as is forever. And just as an interesting thing, the interior of it, if I go up, is half an oil drum. So we just cut literally a casserole drum in half, lined the cut edge with brass, and stuck it into the scaffolding. It's not even bolted on, it just sits there of its own weight, and the doors are completely removable with our hinge system. It's a very special piece. This is one of 3 only ever made, and is available on auction through Strauss. The original version of that is this one, which is just I think a good representation of our design philosophy of the structure, the naked structure, and then the evocative facade. This is a very special piece. It's a 1-of-1, the Nwabu bench, made and shown at Latitude's Art Fair in 2024. This is where our happy space is. The melding of fine art, sculpture, and design. Because again, dividing what is art, what is design. It's all sort of, in a way, part of the same family. This was a technical challenge as much as it was a design challenge, because we had to create ceramic tiles that bent and kept their shape in firing. Clay has a memory. If you do something to clay, when it's drying, it wants to go back to its original form. It wants to go back to the form that it was rolled out in or originally molded in. So we had to manage the drying of these so that when they shrunk during the drying process, they shrunk along the circumference as opposed to wanting to flatten out. And there's an extremely, we used extremely low tech but a clever way of doing it. We took a drain pipe and put the clay over that, and then just put damp cloths over it so that it just kept the weight down and allowed it to dry in that shape. So through a lot of trial and error, we achieved it, and I think the piece has been incredibly well received, and there are now custom-made versions of this going to East Africa. Our screen is iconic, and the crocodile bench. The crocodile was one of the first, the very first pieces we made as Studio Kalki, and this one in here is probably the first crocodile we made. We shipped everything to Union House in Cape Town for an exhibition, and then one day on a quiet day, we recruited some guys and we took them all outside to do the shoot. This is in the parking lot at Union House. They just got cool walls. We've then extrapolated that into an art installation. So this is in Farnham in the UK, in London. And the idea was this cascade of glaze. So it's taking glaze and clay, which is normally a grounded, heavy, earth-based material, and elevating it, creating these floating elements out of it that you can experience in the round. Each bead is a different shape and a different length, and we're experimenting with new shapes and new lengths now. And some are glazed and some are raw terracotta, so it creates a beautiful contrast between the raw material and the glazed finish. And it's adjacent to a staircase, so you experience it in the round. As you go up, you walk around it, and then you get to the top, and it's just this disintegrating, almost cascade of glazed beads. So it's a very special piece, very special installation. And that brings us to our current project, which we've just wrapped up, which is Aspen Room. This represents a lot of our philosophies, but in a highly functional space. It's our mural language, our handmade tiles, our industrial tiles, and our steelwork. This was all fabricated in Durban and shipped to site and installed in Joburg. So it was done completely remotely, but worked out beautifully. We contributed a number of our screens, artwork, the whole kitchen fit out, and 2 crocodile servers to the space. We're very happy with it. We technically shouldn't be showing you this because it's going to be published later in the year, but yeah, just don't share anything on Instagram. This is one of our interior architecture projects. Just going to quickly go through these to show you how our philosophy translates to interiors and to architecture. It's Highthorn. It's a private game reserve in the KZN Midlands, which uses a lot of our tiles and a lot of our sort of basins and accessories. These basins are handmade by Nindya. Another thing we try and do is in every interior project that we undertake, we try our best to use locally manufactured products only. So everything down to the towels and the throw here, that's Mango, made in Plettenberg Bay. The bedding is Shepherd's Store, which is linen made in South Africa as well. Ceramics are, like this vessel over here is made by India. So yeah, I think that's it's a very sober, very like dramatic space. Oh, these beautiful wall sconces are also made by Nin. But it's very successful because it allows the landscape to be at the fore. It's not about the building. The building becomes the colors of the shadow of the landscape, whereas the brightness of the exterior is emphasized. I call the bar is completely made out of Guatemala marble. It's the green mamba, which the client absolutely loves. And then the original lodge was this horrendous. It looked like an 1980s apartheid era thing in Pretoria. It just wasn't nice. And we completely stripped it out and changed all the finishes to natural finishes. And basically re-engineered the whole thing. This was done in collaboration with Julia Rutherford. And then that brings us to Elaleni House, which is a forest house, also done in collaboration with Julia. This is the one that won the Residence of the Year for 2024. In this, we undertook the interior design, the interior architecture, the concept design, and a lot of the tiles. So this house was formulated around this beautiful ficus that sat in the middle of the site. It was about 3 meters by 1.5 meters, or it is about 3 by 1.5 with the trunk. So the whole house basically wrapped around that. And we turned our back to the exterior. We created hard stone walls and opened up completely to this tree, because this tree then became a definitive spatial element. It created shade, it created a backdrop to the kitchen, to the living area, to the entertainment areas. And the only rooms that don't open up onto it are the bedrooms. Interesting thing about this one, the furniture that the clients brought in was not amazing. So we literally packed the truck full of our furniture, some Le Corbusier chairs and some Vassili's and stuff, shipped it to site, did the shoot, and then shipped it all back. The things we had, I mean, here's a legacy one. I couldn't change the art. I mean, look, ostriches, guys. Anyway, this fireplace is really beautiful. I know, she really likes it. This fireplace is really beautiful. This was a Kit Kat tile in our Boomslang glaze that was basically engineered to match, again, the colors of the forest directly adjacent. The KZN coastal forests are absolutely magical, and they have this deep, rich green that, I mean, can't be replicated. And that's just the exterior of the house. So when I said hard stone exterior, I meant it. Bellevue Cafe, this was done in collaboration with Design Workshop. The client wanted a wine bar. And everyone goes like, oh, wine barrels, and your boring sort of. We thought, well, what's the source of fermentation? How did they do it originally? And the Romans did it in amphorae, which were clay vessels. So we took the form of the amphora, which is this very beautiful, very long, elegant form with handles, and created an abstract expression of it using a wide half round and a narrow half round tile. And what you then got was this very interesting living surface, which the entire bar was covered in. And then we built these like curved steel shelves, backlighting and stuff. So it's all a bit zhuzh, but it works really well. And the sort of rough clay texture is a beautiful contrast to all the hard and glamorous elements in the space. And then finally, this is our own home. This is Kilkie House, which is in Glenwood in Durban. We got this house in 2019 in a horrendous state, half completed, or renovations were half completed. It is 120 years old, and we gutted it basically, but kept all the original finishes. So yeah, we created again the colors of the garden, the colors of the shadows of the plantation. So this is actually a dark green, but it looks like a black in here. And then we placed like classical, high modern furniture pieces in there. So you've got your Eileen Gray, you've got your Vasilis, you've got the stuff you saw in the previous shoot. Yeah, it came from here. You've got these Le Corbe LC1s, which in themselves are an interesting story. They came from a basement in Canada, and we redid all the leather, redid all the steel. That's our kitchen, and we conceived of the kitchen as the primary social space in the house, because who sits in a voorkamer anymore? Who lives in a living room? You know, you live in your kitchen. Your kitchen is your social area. You cook together. You know, you have conversations. You have drinks there, and occasionally it becomes where you assemble lights. So yeah, the spaces are very, very flexible, very fluid, and in